Hello there, everybody. I am joined by Jason Robinette, the creator of the Conan CCG. And so he has agreed to talk to me today about Conan, about Star Wars, about Decipher. We're going to have a whole fun conversation. But the first thing I want to kind of know is I think, Always Sunny, it's like every guy's dream is to open up a bar, but I think every nerd's dream is to design a game, maybe. And
Yeah,
you
yeah,
did it. So,
I did.
Jason, I would love to kind of know how you got to that point. And
Sure. It's a weird tale. I'll try to be concise because there's a lot
sure.
of different paths. But I will say I started off playing a lot of games as a kid. My family, we had family game night, so games have always been a part of my DNA. And when I moved to New York, I'm originally from California, but when I moved to New York to go to school, that was early days of Neutral Ground, which some people might know was sort of a magic haven. And so they had opened a new location, and I started going there, and I started to find like-minded people who liked the games that I liked. I played a little Magic, but it never really hooked me in
Like
the same way.
everybody's played a little bit of Magic.
Yeah,
We've all
yeah, and I go
dabbled,
back to it, and I like it. There's,
yeah,
it has its own flaws and problems, but I like it. It's enjoyable. Um, but when Star Trek came out, I started to pick up the cards, and that was what really brought me in. And then they announced that they were doing a Star Wars game, and I mean, I was a diehard Star Wars fan, so I started playing that, doing a lot of work, promoting the game. I was one of the first squadron members, and just did a lot of work on the back end, helping with marketing and things. Um, and so I did a lot of that, and I will say that I probably played 95% of every card game that was released for the next probably decade. There's very few games that I have not at least played a game of, which is great, and it really informed a lot of like what I gravitated towards and what I wanted to do. And so when I was at Neutral Ground one day, this was probably 2002, there was a little handwritten note that said playtesters wanted, and they were making a card game. And I looked at it, and I was like, fine, whatever. So I answered it, and they invited me to some office in the middle. It was a weird like office building in the middle of nowhere after hours. So it's just really strange. And I went up in this creaky old elevator, and I get there, and there's these. I think there were four people there. It's the three main designers and one other person that was playtesting, and they were late teenagers, I think, maybe early 20s, somewhere in that gap. And I had already, I was probably in my early 30s at that point, so I was a little older. And they showed me their game, and I liked it. I thought it had some interesting mechanics. It was a sci-fi gladiator game, which became Ophidian 2350, and they had hand-printed, handwritten cards, no art or anything. And they said, we'll send you home with some printouts, and you could make your own deck. And I said, do you mind if I make a deck here? And they're like, really? You can do that? I was like, sure, give me 5 minutes. You guys keep talking, doing whatever you're doing. I put together a deck. I played 3 or 4 games in a row against each of them. And I mean, I just completely clobbered them. And they were just like stunned.
These are the guys that like created the game, right?
Yeah.
You're beating them in their own game, like
And
handle
it was all because I've played so many different games. I recognize core mechanics to say,
right.
well, this lets you do that. So if you put these two things together, you make more resources. And just like so I showed them very quickly that I knew what I was doing, and they're like, oh, okay, great. So then we just started working together on how to fix the game, how to improve the game, added some additional mechanics, added a comeback mechanic. I introduced some things. Some of them are directly mine, which was great. But this was through Fleer, which I didn't know at the time was millions of dollars in the hole, and they were looking for anything to sort of pull themselves out. They were going after licenses for all kinds of random stuff, hoping to have a big hit. And the Ophidian was one of them. I don't even know that Ophidian would have been greenlit if it weren't for Fleer, to be honest, just because of where the market was at that point, and how many games there were. But they did it, and Fleer ended up hiring me to be an intermediary between the designers and them, because they recognized that I was a little bit older, a little bit more mature, I guess. And I worked on that for a while, but the company went under very quickly. They had a couple of expansions in the works, and it was all just trashed. So that was sort of sad. But
you got a little bit of experience actually
I got a little
designing
bit, and
games,
it got my
right?
name in the credits, and I thought, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah.
So I then went to work for this company called Genio, who was doing they were doing a Mighty Beans card game, which I'll be honest, for a game that's based around an IP of little plastic beans, it had a physical component, and you flick the beans to try to knock
Right.
over cards and stuff. But it was interesting and it was fine. And they had the engine to produce games ready to go. So I joined that company, was hired. I was getting paid a salary as a full-time employee in a game company. I was super excited.
Yeah.
And they said, we're going to start to solicit licenses. And they went after a couple of things that didn't really pan out, but the one that did at that point was Stargate, which, you know, the SG1 show was still, I think, on the air at that point, and I enjoyed the IP, so I started working on a design, and I was really, really happy with it. I thought it was in a great place. I met with MGM Studios. They loved it. They thought it was great. We were totally ready to go, and this was probably in December-ish of a, it doesn't matter what year, but it was like December-ish. And so I was heading home to visit my folks for the holidays. And I get a phone call while I'm in the cab on my way to the airport saying, hold for the president, please. And the company president came on and read a prepared statement that basically said the company was shutting down immediately, effective immediately, no final paychecks, no nothing. Anything that was left in your desk is gone. We're really sorry. Like, just gone. And I found out later that they had sold a couple $1 million of product, because they had a lot of other
Yeah.
non-gaming products as well, to like Rite Aid, CVS type places. And someone had accepted several $1 million of product in returns and signed off on it. And that had already been reported as income, which was like fraud, illegal. So they had to shut the doors immediately, or people were going to go to jail apparently. So that happened, and I was like, poof, it was just gone,
So,
right?
so quick, just question, and we'll
Yeah,
get to Conan after this. But what is it with, like, spoils? I've also heard about sort of this weird fraud that happened.
yeah,
You just described one, Decipher. They're very
yeah.
infamous for what is it about game companies and seemingly like unable to create a business model unless you're Wizards of the Coast? Like, what is this trend? Is it truly that there just isn't the professional acumen backing up a lot of the folks there, or like
I
why
think
is
it's
it seem to be a
situational.
trend?
I don't know if that there's a specific thing you can trace to each of them. I think it's case by case. I think some of what you said is true. I think there is a lack of business, but I don't know. I think it's also because they're companies that start very small and work their way up to being bigger, but they're never quite at the level of being a huge corporation with a lot of oversight and a lot of redundancy. So you have people in positions with a lot of authority and a lot of power with no oversight. So,
Mm.
like Decipher, great example. They had, the person who was in charge of all their finances really didn't have anybody looking over his shoulder.
Well, it was
He
truly
was able
Warren
to do it.
Holland's brother-in-law, right,
Yeah,
as well, which
exactly.
is
So,
also
like,
just, not great from a
exactly. I
nepotism
No, totally,
standpoint.
totally. So I think there's a lot of that goes into it. I know for Genio, that was definitely the case. It was literally someone's secretary signing for things. Shouldn't have been a secretary signing for things
Right.
in the first place. Like, it was just, it's I think also just the gaming space specifically, it's not a high profit industry, right? So and because of that, the salaries are not high. You're not able to necessarily get the best of the best, but you just can't, because you can't afford to pay it because the margins are so small, unless
Well, and I
you're
think it's so
printing
contingent,
billions of
so
cards.
right.
Imagine.
It hangs on, like, is this new set, like, can we move enough boosters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is, like, the LGS scene gonna accept this and, like, be
Yeah.
able to sell X amount of cases? And
Yeah.
that's, like, totally a variable where you have a product that,
Yeah.
like, sets can crash. Anyways, very
No,
interesting.
it's true. Like, I think if they didn't have the fraud, and I think if they had moved into where I think they were headed, which was actually releasing their products in the mass market, having it in your Targets and your Walmarts and places like that, I think that would have given them a boost in production, that would have given them that a little bit more of a safety net, to know that they have stuff that's pre-sold. But they never quite got to that point, and they were really focused on the hobby industry, which is volatile, right? And it's when you're relying on comic book stores and game stores, I would say over half of them are run by people who are passionate about it, but they have no business background. And that's
Yeah.
why so many of them fail. They're doing it because they love it, which is great, but they don't have the expertise to understand how to make money and how to keep the doors open, you know, and then you have game companies relying on those same stores. It's really difficult. So
Yeah,
anyway, there's a lot that can go into it, but
we can have a whole nother
yeah,
conversation about this. I think that maybe we'll put a pin in this and
yeah,
come back to it. But
sure.
let's actually talk about Conan. Okay, so
All
Stargate
right. So,
happened.
so,
This.
so I was at Genio. Genio closed their doors. I had met with, MGM. We had also tried to get an online version of the game going, and there's a reason why that's important. There was a company that was doing online versions, and they looked at the design that I had produced for Stargate and said, "We'll do it, but we're not going to do it with his design," because they wanted to do their own design. Anyway, that all evaporated, didn't happen. And then one of the things I had done at Genio just before they closed the doors was worked with a company from Chile in South America called Myths and Legends, which was being released in the United States. They printed it in English. It was mostly a Spanish language game dealing with worldwide mythologies and things. And it's essentially a Magic slash Star Wars clone. Magic type mechanics with resourcing, and the damage is off the deck like in Star Wars. It's a solid game. It's fine, but not doing anything super innovative. And it was okay, but again, when Genio crashed, all that product just sat in a warehouse somewhere. So a few months later, I was contacted by the president of Comic Images, which happened to be in New Jersey, which was very close to where I lived. And they said, "We've got this Myths and Legends inventory. We need help moving it. And we understand you used to work with them." I was like, "Yeah, I know them. I worked with them." So came in. There was another set that was printed that hadn't been released, that was going to be released, raced around the Arthurian legends. It was the Sacred Sword, and so I kind of came in, and that was my job. I was working a few days a week at Comic Images to help them just sell this product through, because it was just money to be made, and that worked out okay. And then Comic Images said, "Hey, we have Raw Deal, which was a very successful wrestling card game, and we want to expand and do more games." So I was working in the office, and there were only two of us working on games. It was me and Zev Schlesinger, who is the who went on to form Z-Man Games, and we worked together, and it was great. And they brought in 3 licenses that they wanted to go after for games. There was Stargate, surprise, surprise, Conan, and Godzilla. And I was tasked with soliciting designs for each of them. And I said, "Okay, well, I have a Stargate design. I want to throw my hat in the ring for that." And I went out and solicited more. And Conan went out and got a bunch. Godzilla went out and got a bunch. The Godzilla ones were okay. I think the strongest design I got back was from Chuck Kallenbach from Decipher. And it's not an easy IP to really work with, to be honest. Like it just kind of didn't have a lot of direction. But Conan, every single design that came in just missed, just completely whiffed. And it wasn't that they weren't good. It was just that Conan Property said, "No, this isn't what we want." And Conan as a license has a fundamental problem, which is it's based on the works of Robert E. Howard, and the stories that he wrote paint Conan to be a very specific person, a very specific type. He's very smart, very capable, very dangerous, but he's sleek and like a panther. And and then at some point in the early 80s, whatever, the Conan movie came out, and that was not Conan. It was Arnold Schwarzenegger. It was swords and sorcery. They literally slapped the Conan name on it and a few other character names, but it wasn't Conan. But it brought Conan to the people. So most people, when you ask about Conan, that's what they think of, because that's what was out there. So they were constantly fighting against that image, even though that was the image that made people love it. So it's
And
always
probably also made them the most money, right? At the end of the
exactly.
day,
So
right? Like,
it's like, look, you can fight it all you want, but why don't you just embrace it? But anyway, they didn't, and that's okay. So a lot of it was big, dumb, brute, barbarian, muscle-bound guy, and they just didn't want it. And I understood what they wanted. I've gone and done my research. I had read the source material. I had looked at old comics and everything. And I said, "Okay, let me try something." And I went home, just sketched out some notes, made up some mock cards. The next day came in. So I literally designed the core engine in less than 24 hours, brought it in, showed it to Zev. He was like, "Oh, this is interesting. Let's show it to Conan Properties." Showed it to them, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is it. Perfect. Loved it. Done." Like they were done. And I was excited. That was great. And I went to my bosses at Comic Images and said, "Okay, they really like my design." And they said, "Okay, we'll let you do that, but we can't give you 2 designs out of our roster of 3 that we're working on. They
Right.
were going to give me Stargate because I had the design, and they were like, we can't give you Stargate and Conan because it's just putting all our eggs in one basket and it's too much on one person. So I said, okay, I understand. So I lost Stargate again, which is really frustrating. But and the funny thing is, the people who ended up getting the design were that same company that I had shown my design to, that said we don't want to do his design, and they incorporated several of my mechanics. But anyway, I'm not that bitter
So
about
you got the design though. So
I
what
did.
happens now? So there's I
Yeah,
mean, it's interesting like telling this story that like it's one set, I found some boosters, I'm opening them up, want to
yeah,
learn how to play the game, but what happened on this end? So okay, you get the design
yeah.
and now what?
So worked with the license, got a bunch of art assets, created the whole set, play tested it. They printed up some here we go. They printed up these demo decks actually, which were, they're completely blank on the back, just to send them out to retailers and stuff to try to promote it a little bit. And then that was all they really did. They printed it up. They printed what you would expect a release of a game to print, a large quantity. But their marketing department doesn't exist. They didn't have a marketing department. They had one guy who was head of sales, and that was it. And the problem is, up until that point, they had Raw Deal, and Raw Deal was the only surviving wrestling game on the market, and it was based on the strongest wrestling IP out there. So it kind of sold itself. So distributors basically did the work for them, because when they would call up a store and say, they would say, I want Raw Deal, done. It would just sell itself, right? So when Conan came out, there was no marketing behind it. They didn't have a marketing department. So they took out one ad in Scry magazine for $50, and that was it. And so it sold a little bit, but people didn't even know about it. In fact, I still have people who have never heard of it, didn't even know it was released, because they never marketed it. They didn't do it. So part of the deal with the license is you pay an advance on your royalties, and you commit to a certain amount of sales. They realized very quickly it wasn't going to make their targets because they didn't market it. So they said, sorry, Conan Properties, we can't pay the advance. They welched on the whole thing and said, here, take all the printed product. We're sorry. And Conan Properties was like, okay, I guess we have to do this. So they took it and they put it in their offices. Now they have a regular office, right? Workplaces with desks, whatever. And they told me they had literally cases of Conan just sitting around them because they didn't have a warehouse. So they're coming to work every day, and they've got this Conan stuff. So at some point, I was contacting them going, I'll help you sell it. I'll help you move it, but they were like, no, we're working on other things right now, whatever. And then like 3 months later, I said, hey, so what can I do to help you with that? And they're like, it's gone. I said, what do you mean it's gone? They said, we threw it away. All of it. I was like, what are you talking about? This was like about a year, maybe less than a year after it was printed. It was already gone. So 85, maybe even 90% of the print run was destroyed. Just went in a dumpster somewhere and it was gone. So,
So fundamentally that's why this game is so scarce is I
yes,
mean, one, it was a limited print run, but
yeah,
also 80 to 90% of it just never even made it to like the local game
exactly,
store.
exactly. And the few stores that did, purchase it didn't have any sort of structure to lean on. There was nobody there willing to demo it because nobody knew about it, right? If you
Mm.
didn't see that one ad in Scry, you didn't even know it existed. You might come into your store and go, oh, what's that? If it was even there. And I think most of the stores didn't purchase it because they just didn't know about it. So it's it's frustrating. Like, if the game had come out and been critically panned and been a stinker, I would have taken my lumps. It would have been fine. But every single bit of review, every single, BGG at that time had it rated like the highest CCG that was rated, and it had a decent number of reviews on it. It was well received. There were some people who just didn't care for it, which is fine, but it wasn't like it was a bad game. It just never got out there. So it's
Mm.
frustrating. It's scarce, right? There's just not that much out there. But the people that have it, most people don't want to get rid of it because they like it. But
I mean, I will say as a connoisseur of many CCGs, this game looks like nothing else that I've ever
yeah,
seen as far
yeah,
as the art and some of the choices of design. And it's almost jarring how different this stuff is. And
Sure.
the one thing I'll say from a collector standpoint, it does bum me out that there's the 10 ultra rares, because that
Yes.
feels, just as a player collector, that feels like a money grab sort of tactic.
It totally
To
is.
have
It was probably one of the biggest things I was fighting against. I hate the concept of ultra rares that have exclusive
10
like
ultra
this.
rares, it's just
Yeah.
out of a one
Yes.
base
I
set
mean,
is a lot.
the distribution was 2 per box, but you needed to buy 5 boxes minimum to get them all, and that's
Right.
assuming no duplicates. It was really tough. The only thing I did to sort of buck against that was you don't most of the cards are 1 per deck cards. So if you did get a duplicate, it should have been easier to trade for most of them. But even then, I couldn't do it for all of them. And yeah, again, that was something they had done in Raw Deal. So they were just like, it works. They just copied it and did it. Yeah, I hate it. I lost my whole collection in a storage unit thing, and I've been slowly trying to rebuild my own collection. I'm missing 2 ultra rares still. I don't even have a complete set for myself.
I have
So
like 26 sealed packs that I want to open one day, but I'm just so nervous about even trading or selling one of them just in case it has
it
one of
has
the
an
ultra
ultra rare.
rares.
Yeah, yeah,
It just
yeah,
makes me very nervous. I know
yeah.
that 3 open that I've done don't have the ultra rares. So but yeah,
If you have 30 that came from a box, you probably have 2 in there. I mean, again, assuming they weren't pulled from different boxes, you
yeah, I
probably
think it was all one box,
yeah.
is what I end up getting. But um fascinating. Okay, so this is sort of the story of it, but does it end here? Sort of what if you want to get into this game? Is there a future outlook? Is there some sort of stash? I guess what is the future outlook? Or if you want to collect this, you want to play it. Is eBay your best bet? Or what are your
I
thoughts
would
there?
say eBay, Mercari, some of those are probably the best place to get cards at this point. There's just if you can find one of those retailers that just has it sitting on a shelf someplace, I feel like those are few and far between these days at this point. But yeah, there's just not much out there. I've put together some decks with what I've been able to get to try to sell them to people and help. But yeah, there's just really not that much out there. There is someone who's, I think, trying to put it onto Tabletop Simulator, which might
Mm,
be a nice way for people to at least experience the game. And other than that, I'm working on trying to find a way to bring it back, but we'll see how
that'd be
that works
awesome.
out. Um,
I think once a game designer, always a game designer, and it's fun to hear you talk mechanics, and it's almost like two worlds kind of clashing, because I'm so much of the collector mindset where, like, for me, what gives me peace is seeing like a full set of something, right? Like, and then I like playing the games, but I've never been particularly good at it, and so
sure.
it's interesting to talk to someone that just like immediately sees, like, all right, here's your mana base, or here's your mechanics and how that works. Really, really fascinating talking.
Yeah,
Any kind of closing thoughts, Jason? I'm sure we're gonna chat again soon, but
sure.
any
That'd
kind
be
of
great.
closing thoughts on Conan?
Yeah, I understand that there is a TV show in the works for I think Netflix, so maybe
Yeah,
that could be something. I also know that if the laws don't change, and I say that with a big caveat because they do tend to change a lot. Conan the Barbarian should enter the public domain within the next 3 or 4 years. Again, assuming the laws don't change. If they do, then it'll just extend it out, which could change things, good or bad. So we'll see.
sure.
Yeah,
Well, this is a game. I mean, I know it's out of print, it's dead. It's sort of sad that that's the story of it, but hopefully that this story isn't over right now, and that there is a to be continued. Maybe we'll see some more sets. And I will say that I do have 2 decks that Jason has built for me that I am going to test run. I just need to figure out how to play and conscript one of my friends into playing with me. So, Jason, thank you so much for chatting. I think we'll chat again soon, and I'm excited to play Conan.
excellent, great. I'm glad. I'm eager to hear what you think.
Me too. All right. I'll see you next time.
All right, thanks, Matt.